The United States has long boasted its commitment to human rights and has been quick to point out what it sees as violations in other parts of the world. But what is happening inside its own borders? Do its people enjoy all the freedoms and rights they are promised? According to U.S.-based human rights watchdog Freedom House, America's democratic institutions have suffered erosion from flawed immigration policies and a broken healthcare system to socioeconomic inequalities. Problems in human rights within the U.S. are far more serious than what many have been led to believe. Today, we take a deep dive into some of these issues. Gun violence, a long-standing problem that's only getting worse. On August 3rd, 2019, 21-year-old Patrick Crucius drove 1,000 kilometers to a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. With a semi-automatic rifle, he randomly fired at crowds, killing 22 people and injuring 24 others. This was the 7th worst mass shooting in U.S. history.
It was crazy. There was bodies, people running out of the store. There was deceased bodies on the floor. It was horrendous.
In my opinion, I don't feel safe anymore. It's hard. I've never seen it so close, and we live in the borderland.
I'm pretty sure I'm not the only Latino in the United States that feels scared. I'm telling you, it could have been any one of us.
As tragic as it was, this incident was just the tip of the iceberg. 39,427. That was the number of gun-related deaths in 2019 in the U.S. There were 417 mass shootings that year, averaging more than one a day. During the first 46 weeks of 2019, there were 45 school shootings, and that was about one a week. Between 2008 and 2017, on average, one person was killed with a gun every 15 minutes. Americans make up 4% of the world's population, but own 46% of all guns. That means there are 120 guns for every 100 U.S. residents. The U.S. has as many gun shops as pharmacies. The secondhand gun market is huge. Regulations on firearm sales have many loopholes in terms of background checks, age limits, and eligibility. Why can't the U.S. implement a comprehensive gun control law? One reason is the right to bear arms. It was enshrined in the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, a major barrier to implementing strict gun laws. Another reason is the National Rifle Association. It's one of the biggest political forces in Washington, D.C., with 5 million members funding politicians and lobbying against gun control. Faced with one school shooting after another, the NRA says the answer is not fewer guns, but more. Its proposed solution, arming teachers and keeping children away from violent video games. In the 2016 election, the NRA spent $54 million supporting Republican candidates. Among the 535 members of Congress, 307, or nearly 60%, were backed by the NRA in their campaigns. The comfortable relationship between the NRA and American politicians put a roadblock in front of gun control efforts. When innocent young lives are lost, Washington can offer little more than thoughts and prayers. With no gun control legislation on the horizon and no end in sight to gun violence, the newspaper USA Today says America has entered a new and disturbing era of mass shootings. The affordability of healthcare is another issue drawing fierce debates across America. According to Gallup, in 2019, 33% Americans said they or their family put off treatment for a medical condition due to high costs, and 25% said they delayed looking into a serious condition. The rate of postponing medical care was the highest in the past 20 years. Meantime, a report by RX Savings Solutions said the prices of 3,400 types of prescription drugs went up by 10% from the year before, 5 times the rate of inflation.
That one to see, like,
These Americans are traveling 1,300 kilometers north in a caravan from the U.S. state of Minnesota to Ontario, Canada. Their goal? To buy insulin at a tenth of the price it would cost in their own country. The drug is a lifesaver for those suffering from type 1 diabetes.
It is staggering how much more money it is in America. You can see why 1 in 4 Americans are rationing their insulin because they can't afford it. We are from a wealthy country. We are from a great country, but we are not taking care of our citizens.
This retails for around $300 for 1 vial, and I just got it for 25 US dollars here. Now, why the hell is that? Why? It's crazy to me. So I am as excited as I am to save some money. I am devastated to know that, you know, affordable insulin is just available to us across the border.
There is also anger that people continue to die from diabetes because they couldn't afford proper treatment.
I am up here demanding justice for his death.
Nicole Smith-Holt lost her son, Alec, in 2017. He was rationing insulin because of the expense.
Here we are talking about how even though there is a treatment for type 1 diabetes, my own son didn't benefit from that treatment because he couldn't afford it. It's difficult. It's a hard pill to swallow.
The American Journal of Public Health suggests health issues have led to 2/3 of bankruptcies in the U.S. Its report looked at 1,000 cases between 2013 and 2016, and it found a majority of those who had trouble paying medical bills were middle-class Americans who had health insurance. And to speak nothing of those without health insurance, a Gallup report says between 2016 and 2018, 7 million Americans lost their medical insurance. 21% under the age of 35 were uninsured. Healthcare, or the lack of it, has become a key factor that divides the rich and the poor. The U.S. Census Bureau says the income gap is at its largest in 50 years. It's measured through the Gini Index, with 0 representing total equality and 1 representing total inequality. In 1967, the Gini Index was 0.397. In 2018, it climbed to 0.485. By comparison, no European nation had a score greater than 0.38. In 2018, the top 10% of U.S. households controlled 70% of all wealth, up from 60% in 1989. While the share controlled by the top 1% of wealthy Americans went from about 1/5 to nearly 1/3. Those at the bottom half of the wealth distribution saw virtually no increase in their nominal net worth over the last 30 years, while their total share of national wealth dropped from 4% to just 1%. And as we speak, a potentially record-setting amount of money is being poured into the 2020 presidential election campaigns by the wealthy donors and powerful political forces. This, while the 500,000 homeless are without a roof above their heads every night, and 4 in 5 working-class Americans are living from paycheck to paycheck. And then there are the public health crises. Drug overdose has been called the worst addiction epidemic in American history. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says more than 70,000 Americans die from drug overdose each year, making it a leading cause of death in the country. and a majority of those cases involve a prescription opioid. On average, 130 die from opioid overdose every day. And the stories behind these numbers are heart-wrenching.
What are you doing?
28-year-old Danielle Ott was a heroin addict. In their home in Huntington, West Virginia, her mother took this video.
And this is a result of drugs.
It was a slippery slope. Quitting, Danielle said, was hard.
Every time I would try to quit, I would get sick, and then I would want it. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, probably. I've tried to quit it. I couldn't tell you how many times.
To make things worse, Danielle, already a mother of two, found herself pregnant again. At a prenatal ultrasound test, doctors said her child looked all fine except he would be born addicted to opioids and carry many problems that come with it.
I just can't handle that, looking at my baby and knowing, I did that. I just think that is the most selfish thing in the world to do.
So how did she get here? After the birth of her first child, Danielle developed ulcers. Doctors gave her the powerful opioid pain medication OxyContin, something she grew addicted to over time, and her prescription ran out. A single pill on the street sold for $80, but there was a cheaper alternative.
I called my friend looking for pills, and she told me that she couldn't get them, that she had heroin on her right then and there, that it was the same thing as pain pills. After that, what was the point in buying pills whenever I can spend $30 on that?
Danielle's experience is a familiar story across America, which oftentimes has far worse consequences. Official figures show that in 2018, 10.3 million Americans misused prescription opioids, including 808,000 who used heroin.
They're using opioids, either prescription opioids or heroin, because they have to, because they've become hooked. We have an epidemic of opioid addiction in the United States because doctors have been overprescribing pain medication. Beginning in the 1990s, prescriptions for opioids started to soar, and as the prescribing went up, rates of addiction and overdose deaths went up right along with the increase in prescribing. And the reason the medical community started to become so aggressive in our use of these drugs is I believe we were responding in many ways to a multifaceted, brilliant marketing campaign that had been launched originally by one drug company, the maker of OxyContin. It's known as Purdue in the United States, known as Mundi Pharma in the rest of the world.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says from 1999 to 2017, more than 702,000 people died from a drug overdose. And there's been a sharp increase since 2014. Deaths involving opioids grew at an even faster rate. Low-income groups, especially blue-collar whites, have been disproportionately impacted. And now let's take a look at some numbers here. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a research in 2019 which showed premature deaths increased in 48 out of 50 U.S. states between 2010 and 2017. The Midwest and the South were the worsted areas, and opioid overdose was a key contributor. Meanwhile, life expectancy in the U.S. had been dropping in recent years. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says that in 2017, the average life expectancy in America was 78.6, the lowest among comparable developed countries. To say America's race relations are not getting better is perhaps an understatement. A 2019 Pew research showed that 65% of Americans said it had become more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views since 2017. Around 3/4 of blacks and Asians and 58% of Hispanics said they had experienced discrimination. In contrast, 2/3 of whites said they had never experienced racism. No ban! An executive order was issued in January 2017, banning entry of refugees and immigrants from Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, all Muslim-majority countries. Opponents called it the Muslim ban.
And it won't happen tomorrow or the next day.
Though the travel ban was temporarily blocked by a federal court, an amended version was later upheld by the Supreme Court. The impact was drastic. The Migration Policy Institute says between 2017 and 2018, the number of permanent visas given to nationals of Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen fell by 72%.
No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome. The United States is a country of immigrants and a country of refugees as well. And for the administration to do what they've done in this chaotic manner to implement this program is wrong.
In January 2020, the list of countries was expanded to include Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, Nigeria, Sudan, and Tanzania. On top of that, there is evidence of institutionalized racism. I can't breathe. Those were the last words uttered by 44-year-old Eric Garner. He was choked to death by Officer Danielle Pantaleo, who is white, on suspicion of illegally selling cigarettes.
I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone. I told you the last time. Please just leave me alone.
On that fateful day in July 2014, Garner refused to cooperate with the police when questioned. Pantaleo put Garner in a chokehold while trying to arrest him, a move that was banned by the local police department.
Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
With multiple officers restraining him, Garner repeated the words, "I can't breathe," 11 times before losing consciousness. An hour later, he was pronounced dead at a local hospital.
Daniel Pantaleo is a murderer. I feel that he could have gotten off of Eric Garner. I feel that he made a choice, and everybody has a choice.
The case fueled the Black Lives Matter protests across the U.S. Debates went on for years in the legal system whether federal charges should be brought against Officer Pantaleo. A month after the Justice Department dropped the case in 2019, Pantaleo was simply let go from his job.
This is not justice for the Gardner family, because justice for the Gardner family would have been a federal proceeding or a criminal proceeding in the local courts.
Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
According to a 2019 Pew research, in the U.S., about 1 in every 1,000 black men can expect to be killed by the police. Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to die from police violence than their white counterparts. Blacks and Hispanics accounted for 28% of the U.S. population, but made up 56% of the country's prison population. African American adults are 5.9 times as likely to be incarcerated than whites.
We have a history that, of course, begins with segregation and with treatment of those based on the color of your skin very different than others.
And it doesn't stop there. Fast forward to the early months of 2020. Reports of racism emerged again, and this time against the Chinese and other Asians in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak. In New York City, a man assaulted an Asian woman wearing a face mask, both physically and verbally, calling her diseased. On a Los Angeles subway, a man claimed that Chinese people were filthy and said every disease has ever come from China. In some U.S. cities, misinformation about the coronavirus led to increasing xenophobia against those of East Asian heritage.
I think there's still a lot of research that's being done around coronavirus, but the fact that people within the Asian community, people who look Asian, people who look Chinese are being identified as having the virus, I think is a little bit more concerning of a reaction that's happening.
Even mainstream media took part in the trend, with the Wall Street Journal publishing an opinion piece that called China the real sick man of Asia. Washington's recent immigrant policies have also been heavily criticized. In April 2018, the White House announced a zero-tolerance policy against illegal immigration, though media reports showed some legal asylum seekers were also targeted. Adults who crossed the border from Mexico illegally were held in federal jails, while children were separated from their parents in shelters. The New York Times reported chaotic and filthy conditions at some facilities, saying most of the young detainees had not been able to shower or wash their clothes since they arrived, and they had no access to toothbrushes, toothpaste, or soap. Witnesses said they were shocked.
I was and I remain shaken to my core by what I witnessed at Clint. I have 3 children of my own. They are 3, 6, and 9. I do not have the words to explain to them what is happening to children their age in America right now. Families belong together. Children belong free and with their loved ones. That is what is required by our Constitution, by our federal laws, and by our basic humanity.
At least 3 children died in U.S. federal custody in the first 5 months of 2019, highlighting both the treacherous journey to the U.S. and the conditions inside the shelters.
To the fact that we had already children that died in Border Patrol stations. I mean, how can, and now the results of that is because they die because of dehydration. I mean, that tells you something about how the system is working and how abusive it is for these immigrants and for these refugees. I mean, this is not the face of America that we want to present to the world. I mean, we don't supposed to treat children and families like that.
This administration has put forward, namely, make every step of the way as hard as punishing as it can be. Because the logic behind these policies is that if you make it horrible, hellish indeed, people will stop coming. And frankly, this is foolish. No matter how much punishment you build into the policy response, it will not solve the problem. And it will lead to the episodes that we are already seeing, the tragic death of a father and a child. Sadly, if we continue in this pathway, we will only see more tragedies like this because, again, we are not dealing with the reality of facing the fact that these people deserve, indeed, protection, not punishment. And that is what we need to change.
The American Civil Liberties Union says around 55,000 migrant children were separated from their parents by the White House policy. Most of them were from Central America. Domestic policies aside, America has often billed itself as a promoter of freedom globally. But how is its foreign policy record in recent years? On January the 3rd, 2020, a U.S. drone strike near the Baghdad International Airport killed Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani. 9 others were killed, including the deputy chairman of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces. The killings sent shockwaves throughout the region.
خب این ترور که واقعا میشه اسمش یک ترور بین المللی گذاشت و به دست بزرگترین تروریسم بین المللی، خب یک برای مردم ایران و حتی برای دولت و مردم ایران خب خیلی سخت بود این. اما خب باز نشون داد که آمریکا از هیچ گونه راهکاری که بخواد آسیب بزنه به جمهوری اسلامی ایران دریغ نمیکنه. خب میبینید در یک کشور ثالث که حتی آقای قاسم سلیمانی به دعوت اون کشور میره، در کشور ثالث میاد یه عمل تروریستی رو رقم میزنه. خب واکنش مردم شما میتونید در این تشییع جنازه ببینید.
Although the White House promised to cut military intervention abroad, as of early 2020, the U.S. still maintained military presence in many countries, including Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq. Speaking in June 2019, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter pointed out America only enjoyed 16 years of peace with other nations in its 242-year history. This, in his own words, made the U.S. the most warlike nation in the history of the world. A Brown University study says fighting in 4 countries, including Afghanistan, Iran, and Syria, has cost American taxpayers $6.4 trillion since 2001. That figure is $2 trillion more than all federal spending in 2019. And more than 801,000 people have died as a direct result of armed conflicts. Coupled with these wars are Washington's economic sanctions. Critics say sanctions as economic warfare have caused destruction and suffering, in many cases leading to shortages of medicine and malnutrition. Official data show the U.S. has sanctions in place against more than 30 countries, including Iran, Venezuela, Russia, Syria, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. More than 7,000 companies, groups, and individuals are also targeted. Some have been reported to lead to deadly consequences. The U.S. has unilaterally withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal and reinstated sanctions, even as the UN said Iran was keeping its commitments under the deal. America's decades-long sanctions have crippled Iran's economy. Despite doubts of its effectiveness, America's more than 6-decade-long embargo against Cuba has also kept the Cuban economy in a constant state of struggle. Adding a new dimension to all this is America First doctrine.
The America First policy is against multilateralism, is against actually international cooperation. It is based on nationalistic policies and approaches.
Since 2017, the U.S. has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, the UN Human Rights Council, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and the list goes on. U.S.-based Human Rights Watch says the country has moved backwards in that area, both at home and abroad. It is true that Americans still enjoy many freedoms, but as our stories show, America doesn't always practice what it preaches when it comes to freedom and equality. And if anyone in Washington thinks the country's human rights standards should be indiscriminately promoted, they should perhaps think again.